Hello, everyone. Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 91st episode of the Writ podcast. And this morning, I'm joined by Philippe J. Fournier of 338canada.com, Politico, L'Actualité. Bonjour, Philippe. Comment ça va?
Good morning, Eric. It's good to see you again.
So we're going to be going around, just like we did last time, a number of different topics. But of course, the most important one is the upcoming election in Alberta. The last time we chatted, I feel like we had a lot more things to digest because there hasn't been a lot of federal polls. There hasn't even been a lot of Alberta polls. I was just looking at it. The Abacus data one that was published on Wednesday was really the first poll in almost a month. There was also an Oracle poll that kind of came out of nowhere. We don't really have that much data to work with only a few days. I'm guessing we'll see a bunch of numbers on the weekend and in the first days next week. But where's your head at right now when it comes to Alberta?
Well, there's also this Janet Brown poll of Calgary that was commissioned by the CBC, which was really interesting because, you and I know that the gold standard in Alberta is Janet Brown. And so we put a lot of weight into what she has to say and what her numbers. And her numbers were really interesting. 1,000 people in the city of Calgary, split by quadrants. And it showed that the northern half of Calgary was leading NDP. I think it was the northeastern was NDP by 10 points. But the lower half was either tied or led by the UCP. So it was a really interesting dive down of those numbers. But I have to go back to our last podcast where you and I had a little argument on whether the election was a toss-up or not. I came around slowly that it was close to a toss-up, but I think at this point the UCP is much closer to victory than the NDP is. But there's a month of campaigning, so we don't know what's going on. But I would say that the UCP starts at the starting line is the clear favorite here.
The Janet Brown poll was really helpful because it did provide some actual data within Calgary, but I still kind of wish it had a core and then the suburbs, right? Because
That's
each
true.
of the little quadrants that the poll had included some of the downtown core, right? Which we know that the NDP is going to do pretty well in those ridings. It's how well they're going to do in the suburbs. It seems pretty clear that in the northern part of the city, that is the most obvious place where they can make some gains. They had better support there. They did well in 2015. But yeah, it's their ability to break into southern Calgary that we still don't really have a huge clue about which way it's going to go. The Abacus poll, so overall it had across the province, just like a lot of other polls, a tie, 46-46. Interestingly, among the likely decided voters, so people who said they were more likely to vote, the NDP actually was up by 1 point, which I was surprised by because you would almost expect that the NDP would have a turnout disadvantage. And then in Calgary, though, the numbers were just death for the NDP. In this particular poll, had a 7-point lead among decided voters and a 5-point lead for the UCP among likely decided voters. If it's 5 points, if it's plus 5 UCP, then we're talking maybe 50 seats or more for the UCP.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. It's all a matter of expectations now for the NDP. They want to win. They have a chance to win. They have a legitimate chance to win. It's just that, if they win 41 seats, let's say, and it finishes at 46 for the UCP and 41 for the NDP, they're going to be disappointed, even though it's a great result for them, because it's a massive improvement from the last election. But this is a two-way race, and they are the second party in here. So there's no silver medal to be handed. I think there are many scenarios that could unfold that could be very interesting. One of them, Eric, is that the NDP sweeps Edmonton. I don't want to say it's a given, but it's very likely, right? They could win the most seats in Calgary. They could even possibly win the popular vote in Alberta. All three of these things, and yet still lose the election against the UCP that would have most of its caucus in the rural regions of Alberta, which would make for very interesting dynamics. And let's say Danielle Smith and the UCP win again, maybe 46, 47 seats. That means that Danielle Smith has to keep her caucus very happy because she cannot afford to lose 2 or 3 of them that would not necessarily join the NDP, but just could sit as independent and would hold the balance of power. So this is going to be a very, very interesting election for several reasons.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point because when we think about how Alberta politics has been over the last 10 years, keeping together a conservative caucus has not been an easy thing to do.
Exactly.
Right?
Recently,
They've
at least,
already
yeah.
lost. They've lost a few to who are sitting as independents. If they only end up with 46, 47 seats, I'm not sure if that term ends in 4 years with the UCP still holding a majority. It seems like those MLAs in the rural areas might hold a big sway over the government, right? Because you have two or three of them that if they decide to break off to form another Freedom Conservative Party
Yeah.
or join the Wild Rose or something like that, then suddenly you have some real problems. And if it is just a squeaker of a win, I don't know if Daniel Smith's leadership is all that strong to begin with. Maybe the fact that it would be that close, maybe it would keep people in line, but it does seem like for the UCP, not to say that if they 44 isn't a win, but they could probably use a bit more of a cushion than the NDP does need.
Hey, Jason Kenney won 63 seats, I believe it was, and he didn't last his first term. So, the Conservatives in Alberta, they're a tough bunch to please. You'll have to keep them in line, and I don't think that's such an easy thing to do, especially if Daniel Smith is in a weak position. Again, you and I are Eastern Canadians talking about Alberta, so maybe Albertans are rolling their eyes here, but I thought it was so interesting to see this Calgary arena deal, resolved just before the election. And then Daniel Smith says on Wednesday, "Oh, I hope it's not an election issue." I thought that was pretty funny. But those kind of things you can be cynical about. That the government would make huge promises, monetary gains, and infrastructure just before an election, but often it works. And I think we're going to make a segue eventually in Quebec with the announcement of the troisième lien that was canceled. But those big promises often work. And so maybe this will be the final nail in the coffin in Calgary. And she could, again, Daniel Smith only has to split Calgary. She doesn't have to win Calgary to win the election.
Yeah, if the NDP only manages even 16, 17 seats out of the 26, that might not be enough. They need to be 18, 19, 20.
Yeah.
The Janet Brown poll did have them winning 18. So, Abacus did have them down by 5 points or so. But if the Janet Brown poll is closer to the reality that the NDP is ahead in Calgary, then maybe it's a bit closer. But on the arena thing, I do want to talk about that because it is a huge expense. It's over $1 billion. Most of it coming from the city and the province. So most of it is coming from public dollars. To someone who has a lot of money, who owns the Calgary Flames, who's not necessarily needing that kind of backing. You're talking about the troisième lien. That's a public infrastructure,
Yeah.
right? It's not that this is a building that is going to be used by a private hockey team and some other things as well. But there is the chance that there could be some blowback. I was trying to remember the last time this kind of thing was a huge election issue. And maybe you remember this better than I. I'm kind of missing I can't get everything in order. But when there was all of the debate over the funding of the arena in Quebec City, about 10 years ago, and Pauline Marois of the Parti Québécois at the time was favoring it, it was a huge blowback. People weren't all that happy that all this money was going to Pierre Carl Pelledo and to build this arena that was never actually, at least to date, hasn't produced an NHL team. So there is a risk here, I think.
There is a risk. However, again, the people of Quebec City were for the Centre Vidéotron, it's now called. It's the greatest junior arena in the world. It has concert. I mean, it was half paid by the city and half paid by the provincial government, if I remember well. But people of Quebec City loved it. Elsewhere in the province, it was a bit cringe. So that's why I'm saying. I mean, you may disagree on the principle, because of course some conservatives would say, why would we inject money like that? We're conservatives. We're not supposed to be big spenders. But I've seen a few academics in Alberta say, well, Alberta's not that conservative. They're what's the term? They're tax averse. they're not conservatives when it's time to build stuff like that. So, but I think it's even though you can be cynical about this, it's still a genius move in my mind. It's a cynical move, but it's a genius move because, again, usually this works.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll see how it plays out. What take the NDP takes.
Let me ask you this. I know it's really hard because the numbers are close and we're 5 weeks out now. If you have to move the over/under line on the Alberta election, would you?
What was our line that we had?
It was the number of NDP seats, and I set it at 43.5.
Yeah, okay. It was more or less if the NDP is going to win or not.
Well, there's no third party, so it was
Yeah.
basically 43.5, and I believe you took the over. If you could redo it, would you move the line, and what would you say?
Well, I'd still keep the line there because I think it is going to be. I still think the NDP has a very good shot of winning. I think that I don't recall what I think at the time I said that I thought the NDP was going to win or that they were better positioned to win. I think I would more. I might take the over just more as a gambit rather than as a belief. But let's put that on the table. If you were giving percentages to the odds of the either party winning. Now I know on your site you have like actual percentages, but I'm talking more of a gut feel that looks ahead 5 weeks, right? It's not just based on where the numbers are. What kind of odds would you give the UCP and the NDP of winning?
I would probably put the UCP at a 3-1 or 4-1 advantage. When you break it down, you look at the Calgary seats that we talked about, those that will decide the election. The NDP lost several of them by 25 to 30 points. And so even though the NDP is doing better in urban Calgary and probably in the ring of Calgary, they have to win multiple seats that they lost by 25 points 4 years ago. That is a massive ordeal. It can't be done. It's just that everything has to go right. And Danielle Smith, we know she can be mistake prone. We know she can put her feet in her mouth sometimes, but it's only a 4-week campaign. It could be very quick. And so I'd give probably 80-20 my odds in favor of the UCP.
Wow. I'd probably do more 3-2
Okay.
for the UCP, 60-40.
Okay.
I just feel I feel like the NDP is close enough. And I'm a bit more of a believer in the power of the swing. And if the polls have swung 25, 30 points for the NDP, then a 20-point margin last time they can be overcome. And I do think that the potential for Danielle Smith to lose the campaign is really high. I think it's quite high. So
I agree.
But I think if you were saying that the election was today, then maybe I'd be closer to where you are. But if I'm projecting forward, I just think there's the tendency for Danielle Smith and the UCP to kind of screw this up because their track record over the last few months has not been one of political astuteness. Let's just put it that way.
It's going to be a very interesting one, especially I'm looking forward to Oppo Research because there's going to be a news dumps during that campaign. We know there's going to be some. I'm guessing that both parties have checked out the Facebook profiles and social media of every candidate you can find, and I think we agree that this could become a sort of a nasty campaign, something as nasty as we have seen in recent years. So,
what's the over under then on candidates dropped? Because the UCP is going to find some NDP who said things about that make them communists or something like that, and the NDP is going to find some UCPers that are dyed in the wool social conservatives and intolerant about something. And so what's the over under? What do you think the line should be on how many candidates the NDP and the conservatives have to drop?
That's the good one. The deadline, I'm guessing, would be early May or something. 3 weeks usually it is, right? 2-3 weeks. So let's say 2.5. What do you say? 2.5.
I would say over in
really?
a second. I would have said it at like 5.
Okay, 3.5. What do you say? Over?
I'll still take the over. I bet you there's going to be like 5 candidates who end up being dropped.
I'll take the under, and after the election, we'll discuss this.
Okay. I got one question on the Substack chat that we could apply here. This was from Benjamin, and it was just a general question about the importance of candidate quality, because this is going to be a very close election, right? Or it could be a very close election. It could come down to, as we said, a few seats, right? 2, 3, 4, 5 seats. If it's close, it could come down to that in Calgary. So just, we both have thoughts about the importance of a candidate in terms of a race. Now that you've done more elections and you have a few more under your belt, what's your view now on the importance of the local candidate?
Usually, and I know each election is different, but if you just take a rough average, usually the number of candidates that really have an impact, that overperform their party, or really underperform their party if they're underwhelming, it's usually 10 to 15% of candidate, of ridings. So you could have maybe 7 or 8 candidates that really make a difference themselves. And since I have, I think, as of this morning, 15 toss-ups in this election, so that's the number, right? There could be somewhere between 8 and 12, or for 13 really important candidates. We'll see, but. The brand in Alberta, the conservative brand is so strong. A candidate would have to be really bad or get caught saying something really stupid to really hurt the brand. As you said, Danielle Smith could be one of them. She's in this safe riding, obviously, but she could drag the brand down if she has a bad campaign. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to overestimate the importance of a local candidate. I think that when there's a huge star, they can completely rewrite the local dynamics, right? And you can see a candidate get 20, 30 points bumped just because of them. But for the most part, the person who's a really strong candidate's got some links in the community, might be known a little bit. Like, that doesn't really matter, I don't think, all that much. They might be able to do a couple points here and there, but unless they're I'm not even sure if a provincially known person, it has to almost be like someone who outside Alberta would have heard of. I think has the capacity to like boost a party by more than 5 points. I think other than that, it's usually just a couple points. So
Yeah.
in this campaign, I haven't seen any star candidates that would be that kind of candidate that could single-handedly, get plus 10, plus 15. But there will be some. The fact that the NDP has, it seems, a better roster of candidates than they did in 2015, where I think they had a lot of,
Yeah.
what are they called in French?
Les candidats poteaux.
Yeah, that's right. I think this time they have some more candidates who are a little bit more to the center. They tried to get some, counselors and things like that. So I think that will mitigate some of the problems that they had after the 2015 election when, the media was suddenly like, oh, wait, this person's kind of strange. Oh, this person's got this weird thing. So that might help them. But yeah, I don't think it'll have a big impact on this campaign.
One more thing, if I may, on Alberta, because of course and I follow the numbers, and usually the numbers are very close. But there's the elephant in the room of the 2019 election in Alberta, where the UCP was, on average, underestimated by close to 10 points. We can't just ignore the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
right? I mean, in my model, I considered a little bit this underestimation of conservative vote. It's a risky thing because we don't know. I follow the numbers. I use precedent, but is it possible that we're talking right now about a close election, and on election night the UCP has 55 seats and we just missed it? This makes me nervous.
Yeah. You look at some of the polls with the big difference in support for the UCP among older voters versus the NDP support among younger voters. It does make you think that the NDP probably can't go on into election night in a tie. They probably need to be ahead to withstand, even if, because you almost expect that while I think because it's a competitive race and I'm expecting turnout will probably be pretty good, that maybe it'll mitigate some of those issues when it comes to turnout. So it won't be like a 10-point miss like we saw in the federal campaign when it came to Alberta or provincially. But you got to believe that even in the best of circumstances, the Conservatives are probably going to be underestimated by at least 2 or 3 points, right? Yeah. So, but maybe all of that's going to be in the rural areas, and so it doesn't matter on the seat count. So it's a factor, but like that Abacus poll did have the NDP doing better among likely voters. So I don't know. I don't know. We can't assume that it'll be the same way as last time. It's more likely than not, but it could end up being that the polls just end up being pretty close.
This is the most interesting election since the last federal one, right? Ontario, Quebec,
yeah,
PEI. This is this is really a close, compelling election. The others were givens. So
Yeah. And I'd say this one actually might even be closer than 2021 because while the polls were close during 2021, the seats were never really that close.
that's true. That's true.
But that you have a little bit of a bigger spread than I do when it comes to the NDP and UCP. So we'll see. Okay, so let's move on to some other issues. We'll go through these a little bit more quickly, I think. But we do need to talk about, especially since you're here, the news in Quebec. So during the campaign and for the last little while, there's been a huge debate in Quebec over the construction of a so-called third link or troisième lien, which is going to be a tunnel that goes under the St. Lawrence River between the cities of Lévis and Quebec. And a lot of the debate was whether it should be several tunnels, so one dedicated to public transport, one dedicated to just cars. And François Legault was pretty adamant during the campaign that they were going to go ahead with the bitube, the two tubes, that there were studies that were done that they weren't going to release. And in the end, they decided they're going to not go ahead with the two tunnels. They'll just go with one tunnel dedicated to public transit. And it's a huge story in Quebec, and it has some huge repercussions politically in the Quebec City area. What's your view on what's going on?
So this could, I think, objectively be described as the first crack in the foundations of the CAQ. Even though in the end, most experts would say this is the right decision, the fact that they rode two consecutive elections on this issue in the people of Quebec City and Lévis and Chaudière-Appalaches, which is the south shore of Quebec City, there's increasing traffic in Quebec City because the city's gone bigger. It's a city of highways. I grew up there, so people of Quebec City don't get mad at me. It's a city of highways. There's no really public transit except buses. And even the buses are far and slow because the distance are so big. It's a spread. It's urban sprawl, they call it,
yeah.
right? It's a big urban sprawl city. And for years now, they wanted to implement some fast trains, tramways they call it. And they said, well, also to link the two shores, we need a third link. And their first versions of the link was the greatest tunnel in the world, in size and in depth and in length. And we figured, wait a second, Lévis is just a couple of 100,000 people. It's not that big a city, and it's a sprawled out city. But people in Quebec City like the highways, and then they changed to as you said, as two tubes, and then they said, well, we could have buses go there on a reserved lane. So they changed their plan several times, but they were talking about $6 to $10 billion for this, and it never really made any sense. We have great universities here studying geography and demography, and no expert could endorse this because it never made any sense for something that is so expensive. And finally, 6 months after the election, after they tooth and nail, they fought this, said, we're going to do it, François Legault, out of the blue, and unbeknownst to most of his caucus, said, okay, it's going to be one tunnel dedicated to trains, no cars. And the anger in Quebec City and Chaudière-Appalaches is massive right now because they feel like they were, we say en français, roulé dans la farine, rolled in dough. Like, we just lied to you to get your votes, and then after the election we say, oh, it's never going to happen.
Is it as big of an issue in Quebec City as in Lévis?
It's bigger in Lévis than in Quebec City because obviously most of the jobs are in Quebec City. So it's the Lévis people who want to cross that tunnel. But thing is, CAQ has all those seats on the south shore of Quebec City. Federally, they vote conservative. So it is a car-centric area. The fact that they say, oh, we're going to have public transit now. A lot of people say, we're not going to take public transit. We want a tunnel for cars. So not to, I know I'm speaking at length on this, but it's very interesting because the CAQ has looked shaky on this. Many of its cabinet ministers, they vouch for this project, and now they have to backtrack. You have Bernard Drainville on the verge of tears in front of cameras. He's the MNA for Lévis. And he was apologizing to his constituents. So we don't have an organized opposition in Quebec. All the opposition parties are split every which way. But this is the first crack in the foundation of the CAQ because from now on, every promise they make, any infrastructure promise they make, a lot of people will say, oh, okay, just like the third link. Um, so perhaps in a few years we'll remember this as the first crack in the foundations.
The Conservatives seem to be the party that can take most advantage of this. They were kind of the second party in the area.
They were.
And I think they're the only ones that really wanted this also to be a car tunnel. So they do seem to be trying to make some noise out of it. Éric Duhem is trying to get, Éric Kerr, one of the MNAs, to resign. So there could be, it'll be really interesting to see the next set of polls in Quebec to see if the CEQ goes down in Quebec City area.
And we should be able to see some fresh numbers somewhere in May. I mean, Éric Duhem and his Conservative Party were looking for a new topic to speak about because their main topic was the pandemic and the handling of the pandemic. And now that it's slowly fading away, Éric Duhem spent most of this early spring talking about drag queens and how they shouldn't read to children. Same thing we see in the United States. And people will say, okay, we wondered what the Conservatives would talk about after the pandemic. Now it's drag queens, and then suddenly, boom, they have this issue on their lap. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to follow the numbers in Quebec City and Lévis. I think the CAQ will definitely lose support in that area. But they were ahead by so much. That if they lose 10 points, they're still gonna sweep the area. So it's interesting. It's a very interesting story.
Yeah, and it just to bring it to the federal level, you had Pierre Poilievre who was talking about it, saying that he would only fund the tunnel if it had a car tunnel, whereas the federal Liberal government is only paying for the public transit section of it. That is an interesting play because it is in a direct confrontation with François Legault. It doesn't really seem to me to gain him anything. He has all the seats in the area, and they're all pretty safe seats, so I don't see what the point is. But it is interesting to see him take that route, because also there was a press conference a little while ago, weeks ago, and a journalist at the time was asking about crime in cities and saying how there was high crime in conservative-run cities, conservative-run provinces. And the journalist mentioned François Legault, and said it was a conservative premier. And Pierre Poilievre said, no, he's not. He's not. So I think that's interesting. He's not taking the Aaron O'Toole route of trying to be François Legault's friend.
It's so interesting as a strategy. I have to say I do not understand it. Because if there's one thing that François Legault and the CEQ like, it's being told what to do by the feds. The fact that he would said I would not put a cent if it's only public transit. François Legault and the CEQ did not blame Justin Trudeau and the Liberals at all when he canceled it. They could have said, oh, it's because the federal government will not get involved. They could have said that because it's a nice scapegoat. They never mentioned that. The feds have this policy that they only invest in infrastructure in public transit. It's been the case for years now. But the fact that the Poilievre would come in and say, we'll add more cars in the city, in the Quebec City area, that means I think he's not going to make any gains outside of this area that he already has. Pierre Poilievre has to find new ways to win suburban Montreal and the eastern townships. That's not going to cut it.
Yeah, we'll see how that's going to play out. Okay, we'll go maybe a bit more rapid fire through these last couple of ones. There were some New Brunswick by-elections that took place earlier this week. The Liberals were able to retain all three of the ridings. They're all in francophone parts of the province. There was some speculation that the leader, Susan Holt, would be under some challenge in her riding of Bathurst, East Nipisiguit, St. Isidore. There was a Green candidate who's really well known in the area. In the end, the Greens did pretty well. Going back to the conversation about candidate quality, he bumped the Green support up 23 points, but the Susan Holt still won it by a big margin. Curious, just your thoughts if there's anything to take from these three wins.
Not very much. I'm very careful with by-elections, especially with the Greens. And I know the New Brunswick Greens. Sorry, they do well in elections and compared to other places in the country. But Annamie Paul had done well in the by-election of Toronto Centre. I mean, in by-elections you get your people, but in a general election, when the turnout is much higher, will they be able to repeat that? And also, in one of the riding, there was no PC candidate. So I don't know. I'm trying not to read into it. There would be a story if the Greens had made it close. They did okay, but a by-election with against a leader, it's a non-story for me.
Okay, and what about just the general picture in New Brunswick? So The polls have more or less a tie
Yeah.
between the Liberals and the PCs, but the PCs have more of their support in southern New Brunswick, so they can win a lot more seats than the Liberals, even if they're behind. There is an election there next year. One of my takeaways from these by-elections, one, the Greens were in second place. These are all Francophone ridings. It's an interesting development if the Green Party becomes the second party of Acadians in New Brunswick.
Right.
Probably doesn't have much of an impact on seats, but there was a riding in the Moncton area in Dieppe. Again, very Francophone area. Not all of Moncton is as Francophone, but the PC vote really tanked.
Yeah.
And there's a couple seats that were pretty close in Moncton last time, and if the PC vote drops even a little bit compared to what happened in the by-election, then, it does suggest that the election next time could be quite a bit closer than it was in 2020.
By how much do the Liberals need to win a popular vote to win the election? I mean, Monsieur Galland won by 6 points, I believe, and he lost by one seat.
Yeah.
The regionals here are very interesting. Also the question is, will Mr. Higgs stay? Because he has to face now a much younger woman, fully bilingual. I think it's a good pickup by the Liberals to have her as a leader, Miss Holt. So we'll follow the numbers, but this could be another one of those nail biters that this gets decided by 1 or 2 seats.
Yeah, I think unless the Liberals make a breakthrough in among Anglophone New Brunswickers, they got to be up by 8, 9, 10 points to have a good shot of winning, which is really tough.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, another little quick one. I got this question as well from the Substack chat. BC United. They are united. They are adopting colors of a kind of a burgundy teal and a burgundy pink and a teal, kind of a Bloc Québécois, Canadian Alliance kind of vibe to those colors. In Quebec, the Coalition Avenir Québec was kind of a marketing. It was a good branding exercise, right?
Yeah.
It put itself right into the center. Didn't necessarily say exactly what it was. At first, it didn't seem to have any traction, but now it's a big force in Quebec. You saw the Saskatchewan Party in Saskatchewan try to join the Liberals and the Conservatives, those voters into just a generic brand. You have the United Conservative Party, which is in Alberta, making the point that the Wild Rose and the PCs are together. But this one wasn't a merger. It was just a rebrand, because the Saskatchewan Party was the Liberals and the PCs, or at least their backers getting together. The party still existed. And in Quebec, technically, Legault started his own party and brought in the ADQ. This is just a rebrand. What do you think?
I must say, regardless of where they stand on the political spectrum, I kind of like this rebrand. I like the name. It sounds like a soccer team, of course, but I like the name. And the pink and teal mix is very interesting. There's a debate on whether to use pink or teal on the maps and on the graphs. I chose pink, but I'm going to backtrack. I'm announcing it here. I'm going to backtrack and I'm going to go back to teal. I think it makes more sense.
Decision.
But really? I'm glad you agree. But the thing is, they want to shed this liberal view, because their brand of liberalism is more akin to Europe's, where liberals usually are considered center-right and not center-left, and they are a center-right party. So I think they wanted to shed that to make sure they would retain some of those more conservative voters in the interior. And I think it's a good name. I don't know. It's hard to go outside. Maybe it's not that original, but I kind of say I like it.
I mean, it makes sense. The BC Conservatives are present. They show up in polls. They don't really show up in the ballot box. But now they actually have an MLA who crossed the floor. So maybe that contrast is good to have next time, that they're not the Liberals. They're BC United. I made the joke a couple times on the Writ, but I still don't know what to call them. What are the BC Uniteds? Are they, if you're I've gone through, maybe they're the BCUans, or take the French way and call them les unitaires or something like that. Les unionistes.
Les unis.
Yeah. I don't know. There's not an easy way to call them. So I think that's the biggest. Also, just the logo itself, thumbs up, thumbs down.
It's unoriginal. I'm guessing that they're keeping the best for later when it matters. It looks like a Windows 98 thing. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it's
good colors though. Good colors. But
okay. One last quick thing, and then we'll finish up. And this is a federal one. There was an article recently in The Hub, and it was talking about conservatives who were talking about fear of what would happen after the next election if they end up with a minority, that the Liberals could still try to hold on to power. And a quote from an unnamed conservative source was that the Conservatives would go nuclear on the Liberals if they tried to hold power if they lost a number of seats. On 338canada.com, you do include some calculations of combinations of parties.
that's right.
What's your thoughts on this? Because for me, if the Liberals and the New Democrats end up having a majority together, then something could happen, right? Then you could have Trudeau on election night say he's going to look at his options. He makes a deal with Singh, and there you go. But it feels to me that if you don't have a combination of Liberals, NDP is plus 172, it'll be next time.
Yeah.
It feels like the Conservatives might still be able to hold on anyway.
You would guess that if the Liberals win maybe 20 to 25 fewer seats than the Conservatives, Justin Trudeau would resign. And then you would have a leaderless Liberal Party. It's akin to 2006. I mean, Mr. Harper did not have a majority, and there were options for a coalition that did not happen because, the Liberals went into a rebuild, and it was a long rebuild too. Let's say a nightmare scenario that the Liberals and the Conservatives are near tied. Let's say 140 or 145 seats each.
Now I have them at 137, 136.
Oh, really? I have them at 138, 137. So let's fight. But seriously, right now there's no scenario where a parliament could function for a long time. But if the Conservatives win a strong minority, let's say 155 or something, they're going to be able to make punctual deals with the Bloc Québécois, and you would see the Liberals, the leaderless Liberals, and the NDP. And I'm guessing the leaderless NDP at some point, they would have to go into rebuild mode and try to just hold on until the next election. So it's not majority or bust for the Conservatives, but they need to have a clear win, because otherwise, the NDP would much rather work with the Liberals than the Conservatives. I don't think there's any debate about that.
I think it's big minority or bust. It's got to be like 150 or more.
I would say
below that, then it starts to get. But again, if the Liberals and the NDP can't combine, I don't see how they try to hold on and get with the Bloc again. That's just not going to work.
No.
So.
And the Bloc is not interested in making any coalition of any color. The Bloc is not in the business of making Ottawa work smoothly. Let's people remember that. I mean, they could have, again, maybe I'm using the wrong word, ponctuel, like a one-time entente on a budget or something. But the Bloc Québécois is not going into any coalition whatsoever. And Pierre Poilievre right now is not popular in Quebec. The numbers are really bad for Pierre Poilievre. So Bloc Québécois is not going to help Poilievre. So, it's a strong majority or bust. I agree with that.
Yeah. And just to put it on the table, constitutional convention is that the Prime Minister has the right to face the House. So if he decides to do that, that's completely within his legal right. The amount of stink that the other parties will put up against it, there's more of a political legitimacy question than an actual legitimacy question. So we should just put that aside, that if they want to try, they have the right to. But if you want to try and it's going to fail, then you probably shouldn't. It's just as simple as that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so we're days away from the Alberta election. There's all these other little stories that are fun to chat about too. So we'll have a chance to chat again pretty soon. And Philippe, thanks very much. It's the Maple Leafs are playing tonight. We're recording this on Thursday. I think we had a bet whether they'd get out of the first round or something, eh?
There's no way that happened last night. 4-1 to 5-4. Usually the Leafs lose those. I mean, the Leafs are probably going to win. It's a pretty safe bet right now. They're probably going to win. But if they do lose, if Tampa Bay wins that series, it's going to be even more epic. So it's going to be very interesting to follow. And I know I'm not making any friends in Toronto area right now. So.
Yeah, that's all right. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Philippe, and I wish you a good Alberta election campaign.
Talk to you soon, Eric. Merci beaucoup.